everybody. I'm Matt Valley, and this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the research and insights pros that you trust. This, in fact, is episode number 113, believe it or not. But it's actually the first live episode, so thank you to IIEX for that. Very, very excited. So my guest today, super excited for my guest today. My guest is Nicholas Jayanty, who is a principal UX researcher for IBM's Red Hat, right? But he's so much more than that. So I met Nicholas when he was actually my client, when I was working at UserZoom once upon a time. I see a UserZoomer there in the audience. And it was a great experience because it was a shift from market research into user experience research. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But in addition to being a principal UX researcher for IBM Red Hat, Nicholas is also a designer himself. He's got a really cool portfolio online if you check it out. But even more interesting than that is he has been a filmmaker, a film producer for many years, and he's received quite a few accolades. He's got one film called Ecotone. Ecotone was a 2011 New York Times Critics' Pick, I believe. And another really cool film called Skateland from 2010, which was featured at Sundance. So how cool is that? That's a great thing about researchers. This is an easy podcast to do because there are so many cool stories out there. But welcome to the show, Nicholas.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Thanks to all the folks at IEX for hosting us, and excited to chat today. Thank you.
Yeah, right on. Me too. So here's how we like to start. So you're a principal UX researcher. Tell us about how you got into the field of UX research in the first place, and a little bit about what you're doing now.
Well, the beat's long and winding road is the first thing that echoes in my head when I'm asked that question. But
Love it.
I started in entertainment, right? I went to film school at the University of Texas, graduated in RTF, I think in 2004, and tried to get out of Texas as quickly as possible after that. Beeline for New York, worked in television and film until I had a pretty exciting opportunity on one of the projects that I was working on. So when I moved to New York, right, I was a production assistant. I don't have any family in the industry, My only option was cold calling. So I literally cold called like people to find my first job.
Oh, wow.
And my first job came through a production coordinator who did a bunch of coordinating for indie film. And so, it was an interesting exercise, right? Because you don't have the numbers.
Right.
This is before like LinkedIn.
Right.
So like you had IMDb, so you could Google all the movies you liked made by filmmakers you respected.
Yeah.
And then you knew that they're not going to hire you because you're the lowest person on the totem pole.
Right.
So like there's someone called a production coordinator who actively hires people like me at that time.
Okay.
So I didn't know who they were. But New York had this other print tome that you had to go to the New York Film Commission to get, and it's all of the production coordinators' phone numbers.
Oh, kind of like a white pages for the industry? Okay.
Whether they opted in or not. So like I called Spider-Man's production manager and was like, I'm in town. And he's like, I only hire people I trust with my life. Then I called Spike Lee's production coordinator.
Yeah.
She answered the phone and she was like, how the F did you get my number? Don't call here again. And then hung up on me. But I finally found one person who appreciated the hustle and was like, yeah, I'm not hiring right now, but I'll connect you to someone who is. Enter my first gig in New York, which was Ivana Youngman, starring Ivana Trump.
Oh, wow.
And Ivana Trump was a matchmaker between a financially wealthy older woman and younger men, and she's trying to connect them.
Okay.
So that was my first real television production job in New York City. And so from there, it was a lot of different gigs and a lot of waking up at 4 a.m. to pick up the cube truck and driving around Manhattan. I'd never driven a cube truck before, but I'm like, yeah, I could do it. So I ended up connecting with someone who had a relationship with the development executive who gave us The State, the sketch comedy show from the 90s,
yeah.
and even better, The Jersey Shore. And
so
we got to present this absurd sketch comedy pilot to her. She ended up seeing it. One of her assistants saw it. He is now, I think, one of the directors of development is Leonardo DiCaprio's production company. So he saw it, and their names were Jackie French and Mikey Ireland. Aren't those the funny, most interesting names?
That sounds like the Big Lebowski.
Yeah, right? So they saw the movie, right, or the show, and they're like, okay, we want to make this. So they flew my friends out to L.A. We pitched it there, and then me and my producing partner for the future met for the first day on that set.
Oh,
So
wow.
we'd never met in person. And so when we met, I expected him to be this kind of like short guy with a big attitude. And he thought I was this really tall guy with like a commanding presence. And we get there and we're totally reversed. I was like, you're a lot taller than I thought. He's like, you're a lot shorter than I thought.
Love it.
And from there, we made the sketch comedy pilot for MTV. They gave 25-year-olds like $500,000 to go play in Austin with our filmmaker friends.
Wow.
That's kind of how the film piece started. So we made a couple films. One of the films, like you mentioned, was a film called Skateland. But the documentary that I feel like is very appropriate for this podcast is Ecotone,
Yeah.
which is an independent rock doc about gentrification's impact on the creative class of Austin, Texas.
Yes.
It was filmed in 2007 when a lot of these buildings that we see did not exist.
Right.
And now, you can see the skyline. It's changed dramatically.
Mhm.
And so is the music scene. It used to
Totally.
be a very locally centered music scene. And now it's more of a touring city,
Yeah.
right, where bands are coming through. There's still pockets of that indie scene from like
Right.
10 years ago, but it's not as vibrant and virile as it was because all the development has jacked the cost of real estate up. And,
Sure.
people like myself, we like good, affordable rent.
Yeah.
So, we might have migrated to other parts of Texas as a result. So 2011, moved out to LA, independent, producing as an independent producer with different projects, and found myself wanting to better understand brand funding. So I took a job at Film Independent, which is the
Okay.
largest arts nonprofit in Southern California. They do the Spirit Awards, the Independent Spirit Awards, as well
Right.
as the Los Angeles Film Festival. So I was doing a lot of brand fundraising. And so Ecotone was financed through a lot of brand money, actually.
Oh,
So
okay.
The brands paid the bands. That was the deal.
Got it.
Through developing that muscle, it led to that job. And then I started to interact with all the digital agencies, right? So we were
Okay.
interacting with like 72 and Sunny and like
Right.
big, cool digital agencies. And I was kind of new to this space. And they'd always ask us, well, what's the event's digital strategy? What's y'all's plan? So I started to like think about like, what are digital programs for this? I was like, I might need to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking some night classes at Art Center, College of Design in Pasadena.
Okay.
That's where I met
Yeah.
my department chair who runs the interaction design department. She's like, you should really check this out. So I took another class with her. And by that time I was hooked.
Yeah.
And so I left the entertainment industry, quit a full-time job and went back to school in industrial design.
Yeah.
And then from there, started my first gig was at the United States Geological Survey on a
Oh,
product called
fascinating.
Shake Alert. So it's the earthquake early warning system.
Ah,
And
okay.
a
Okay.
lot of the work I did was focused on making the earthquake early warning inclusive. So for people
Okay.
that are differently abled, whether they're unsighted or have different abilities in terms of hearing, how do we make that warning available to them just as much as we make the warning to people that
Yeah.
have complete abilities, right?
Yeah. That's
Um,
interesting.
So it's a really interesting research because a lot of UI research, a lot of like
Mhm.
prototyping different signals, and so that kind of led to the role at IBM. And then from IBM, I was there for 4 years and worked a lot in their cloud infrastructure space,
Okay.
and which is super boring and nerdy. Our Mario brothers were our heroes. We were like IT plumbers and we loved it.
Love it.
Well, it's nice. You're making tools for people, right?
Sure.
You're not necessarily stealing their attention.
Yeah.
And so that for me really resonates. It's like, how do I make someone's life better? How do I get them home at 5? Right? That's my user experience vision for everyone is like, how do we get them home by 5 so they can hang out with their kids and have dinner or
Right.
or their friends? Not to bias one normative relationship, but
Yep.
that is kind of how we got here today. So
Yeah.
long winding road.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. So, when did like the real turn towards research happen, or how did that happen?
It happened while I was in design school.
Okay.
I had the opportunity to do some really awesome field research.
Okay.
So one of the projects that we had the opportunity to do was in Berlin. And
Okay.
it was a
Awesome.
design a hospitality experience for the techno tourist.
Okay.
So how does one understand the techno tourist?
Yeah.
Unless you become one.
Right.
And that led to like 3-night field research events where we're like sleeping in a club in like Berlin there. Because you don't realize what you need until all of your needs are stripped away.
Yeah.
And at the end of that 2-day, 3-day kind of stint in like a dark club in Berlin, you nap, but all you want is a shower, some clean underwear and socks.
Yeah.
And so that led to a lot of the design solution, which was like vending machines where you could get undies, socks, chips,
I love
like
it.
maybe some heartburn medication, and like get back into the club.
Yeah, it's almost like a deprivation study, right? Here it is, and then what needs emerge from that? It's like I desperately need some socks, man.
Yeah. And so that field experience was like, I was like, okay, there's something here. It felt very much like documentary filmmaking, right? Where you're
Yeah.
you're like immersed in the environment, you're living, breathing, eating, and sleeping the people you're around.
Yeah.
And then the next project that kind of reinforced that epiphany was this project we did at a pediatric burn clinic in Santiago, Chile. So we're
Oh,
doing
wow.
research in Spanish.
Mhm.
We're living on the campus for 6 weeks with the families and children that have been horribly burned. And one of the big insights for us was that, kids grow,
Mhm.
but scars do not. And so what
Right.
that leads to is an 18-year treatment journey that this child has to come back to this facility every year.
Right.
And it's the largest pediatric burn clinic in South America.
Wow.
So people are being bused from Bolivia, bused from Uruguay, and families are leaving their other kids at home so the
Mhm.
parents can be there with their other children. So what they noticed was that there was this attrition that fell off around 11.
Sure.
Patients stopped coming back. And it's
Mhm.
all free. So there's kind of an investment that they're making into these children as well,
Right.
giving them free care. So they want them to go all the way to 18.
Mhm.
So our design challenge was, well, how do we empower these children
Yeah.
to take control of their care and own their care if their parents can no longer join them when they turn around 11?
Right.
Imagine your child, most of the kids are injured at like under the age of 6.
Mhm.
So by the time you're 11, mom and dad have been leaving work, coming with the kid
Right.
on a bus across South America for 6 years.
Yeah.
So at that point, mom and dad are a little burned out. They're like, okay, this is a big ask. So the design challenge was like, well, how do we empower these kids?
Mhm.
And a lot of that looked like just like changing the physical space, creating
Mhm.
when mom checked in, so did kid.
Right.
Creating ways for kids to check themselves in just by knowing their phone number.
Right.
Really simple digital enhancements. The brief was create an innovative, inspiring waiting room. And then when we got there, we realized, oh, the real problem is people just need really simple digital tools to get stuff done so they can get in and get out. And
Right.
so that you can't interview a 4-year-old.
Right.
So you
Right.
have to co-create with them. You have
Yeah.
to make with them to understand what it is to empower them. So the kind of study that really flipped that was we asked the children, if you were king or queen for the day, what would your bedroom look like?
Mhm.
And we'll draw it for you. So this child is describing their bedroom, and I'm drawing it for them right next to them, showing them like, okay, so this the bed would go here, and they're like, yeah. But mom and dad are the patient, and I'm the doctor.
Right.
So you want her bedroom to look like a medical facility, but in this rule, the roles were reversed.
Got
Mom
it.
and dad are getting the shots while the kid is giving them, and so that kind of was one of the first signals that was like, oh, these children want to be in control. We want them to be in control. They're expressing a need to be in control. So
Right.
through this making activity, how do we line these needs and aspirations up, and how can that drive the solution?
Cool, cool. So let me ask you a question because a lot of people are researchers, and there's this discipline called UX research, which for me was really eye-opening, right? So the question is, a lot of people on the market research side are like, oh yeah, UX research is just kind of a subset of market research. But in my experience, it actually feels like a different discipline because it's got sort of a different origin story. It's rooted more in design sprints than it is in political polling, for example. So can you comment on that? What's your take on it?
So I'm going to apologize in advance because there might be some bias that
Yeah.
shows up in this. I'm going to apologize in advance because there might be some bias that shows up in this response.
Okay.
But when I think about what differentiates market research from user research, I go back to what's the outcome.
Okay.
And market research, and this is my bias, the outcome is often moving revenue,
Mhm.
right? And selling products. As a
Right.
user researcher, that's not my outcome. That's a secondary effect of being successful at my outcome,
Right.
which is making a person's life better.
Mhm.
So I start at the person level and I figure out what's going to make this group of people's lives better. If we deliver the solution, how might that benefit my business?
Right.
While I think the inverse, and this is my bias, is that we're like, we need to hit this target. How do we go out and find a need and fill it and meet that target?
Mhm.
So it starts with the revenue target as opposed to a human outcome. We ask similar questions and we sound similar, but what's motivating us, I think, is what differentiates the two disciplines the most.
Okay. Interesting. Is there curious to know from your perspective, do you encounter market research? Do you work with it?
I love working with market researchers that like are passionate about user research and delivering value.
Yeah.
Like when we can get past kind of the outcome, kind of not even get past, just like saying, okay, this is what I'm after, this is what you're after, win-win partnership. Let's do
Sure.
this together. It creates a richer research program.
Yep.
It's more mature. It's using the best of both worlds. Market researchers might use quantitative data one way. I might work with quantitative data a different way. I'm like training a hardcore field researcher who loves qual, but I see the value of quantitative, and it's pushing me to change how I think about qualitative data from cross-pollinating with market researchers.
Right.
Like, I see some really great work being done by customer adoption and customer experience teams, and they're working from a data-driven point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But the data that they have access to, unfortunately, often loses the human layer. And I'm even witnessing UX is in kind of an existential discipline crisis at the moment as well, because I'm hearing a lot of UXers start to say data-driven, data-driven.
Right.
But I always felt like our value add was empathy. The human needs and the pain. Yep. And I heard an amazing story last night, actually, about bridging something that I call the empathy gap.
Okay.
Right? Which is, there's a huge distance between an executive and the person that they're selling to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the empathy gap.
Right.
And so I heard a story of someone who worked on the Real Beauty campaign last night, the Dove Real Beauty campaign.
Right.
And they said the way they got that sold to the board at Unilever was they actually brought the daughters of the board members and interviewed them about body image before they pitched the campaign.
So powerful.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
and I think it just goes to show what we have to do as researchers to bridge the empathy gap.
Yeah.
That's a wild idea.
Yeah.
We're going to go stalk the board members of Unilever's children and interview them about body image. I mean, I love the idea, but I need a really supportive manager to let me go do that.
For sure.
Or a real visionary leader to give me the room to do that.
Right.
But that's what it took to get that campaign sold into Unilever. So bridging that empathy gap, getting out into the field, that's what qualitative research's value is, intrinsic value. It's hard to quantify.
Yeah. Cool. So you have this really unique experience of working in film. This is what I love about the podcast, to hear these perspectives. So what do you think you took from that experience that you have applied to your professional career at Red Hat?
Yeah. So, I engaged with the independent film space through a startup. Mm-hmm. That was the vehicle that we used to engage with independent film.
Right.
And our mission, it was very mission driven, was to create a sustainable film industry in Texas.
Yeah, here.
And we started to figure out, well, what are the problems? And the problem was there was a lack of financing infrastructure.
Yeah.
There wasn't like a place I could go to today, pitch a script, and get money to make a movie. That's all in the West Coast or maybe New York.
Yeah.
And so we started to investigate, why did independent investors invest once and then taillights? Like, they'll put money into one movie and then they won't put another money into the next.
Right.
What we learned was that the data that filmmakers needed was based on outliers. If all of your comps are based on Sundance breakouts, that's not a representative picture of the market.
Right.
So you're mismanaging your investors' expectations.
Yeah.
And none of these filmmakers are doing it maliciously. I wasn't doing it maliciously. This is just the data I had available to me.
Right.
And because of that poor data, we realized that's why there wasn't the sustainable film industry, right?
Okay.
So then there's the whole supply chain piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at independent film as a supply chain is very much what I bring to looking at UX. All of us are members of the intelligence supply chain. I don't know if we look at ourselves in that way.
Should.
But I think it's a really interesting picture when we start to ask that question. What is the intelligence supply chain? Especially with all the data and the AI and the different tools that we have to play with this data. But we're all bringing it in, and none of it's interoperable. It's locked in your database and your Salesforce instance and my Salesforce instance and your Qualtrics instance, and it's all fractured across our organization. I know it's there, and I want to go get it. So as you start to kind of build business and industry, you start to take that level higher point of view, where it's less about where the button goes and where the business goes.
Sure.
So that supply chain perspective from film is definitely something I carry into UX, into a lot of the operations software I work on. So when you start to think about that, you can see that ecosystem. And so at Red Hat, right, we're an open source company.
Right.
And that supply chain is a very interesting supply chain, because we have a whole innovation engine upstream of us that's people that are intrinsically motivated to make their software better because they use it every day.
Exactly.
That's very unique.
Yeah, they're doing it for themselves in a way.
Yeah, they're their own users in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the film community in Texas. You could do the same thing for the punk rock community. As you know, I play in a punk rock band, and the idea of sustainability in punk rock in Texas is just impossible.
Yeah.
Which is sad, because I got a lot of friends that are really trying to make a go of it. So
I've heard some success stories about just building your fan base locally, like 50,000 fans in the world at the same time. There's a rapper from Austin named Bavu Blakes, and he actually has a song called 50,000 Fans in the World at the Same Time.
Oh, cool.
And he came up with that song because he was inspired by an artist from Houston named Zero.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I may have mentioned this last night, but Zero is a rapper from Houston. Outside of Texas, no one knows who he is.
Right.
But he would sell 50,000 records consistently at the street level. And this is before Spotify and the digital revolution.
That's nuts.
But he had the infrastructure to move 12 albums over the course of 90s to like 2006 on the street, 50,000 records per album in Texas alone.
That's crazy. Wow.
So I think there's things to be learned from it, right?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so back to the research part. Just one question. I mean, just given your interesting background and the work that you're doing currently, as you kind of peer into the future, what does that look like for research, or what maybe do you hope it looks like?
These are all my opinions.
All right.
None of them are of
Disclaimer noted.
Disclaimer. But I don't have a crystal ball, but there are some specific data points that have me asking questions.
Okay.
So, there's some very senior UX roles, and the members that occupied them when they retired or moved on, those roles were not backfilled.
Right.
And they're like, VP of UX and like high UX roles. So the career path, is like, okay, what's going on with that?
Right.
Then you're seeing the adoption of design thinking. Everyone is using design thinking. It's a new tool in everyone's belt. So that strategic layer of the UXT is kind of getting parceled out and distributed.
Right.
Yep. And then you have the hands piece of UX, which is the craft. Like my hands make things and they're trained to make these things.
Right.
Now we have all these great AI tools that are kind of snipping that away.
Yeah.
So where is UX, right? What does UX need to do as a discipline to continue to have a seat at the table?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the last decade was really about UX earning that seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And now that seat at the table is maybe being called into question. And I think that's a very insular, navel-gazing kind of perspective that's pretty much insulated to UX.
Sure.
Because when you talk to engineers, they're like, dude, the software is the table. Y'all don't ship code. Y'all like support.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind that that's the perception, right? While UX is like clamoring for the seat at the table and engineers like, the table's over here, bro. That opened my mind. So when I peer into the world and say, okay, if the software is the table, how does UX actually earn that seat?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is about the tools that we have.
Okay.
For example, a user experience team delivers an SVG. If they're lucky enough to have a front-end engineer, maybe they deliver code. But the majority of folks deliver static graphic specs.
Mm-hmm.
And then an engineer's job is to take that spec and turn it into code.
Right.
That means you have a dependency on an engineering team.
Yep.
And that engineering team has customer requirements, customer stories, technical debt stories that they're prioritizing.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're in a list of stories just trying to get prioritized.
Right.
So you're a dependency now. So you're very much not on a seat at the table. You're waiting for someone to be like, oh, well, you can come to the seat at the table for a moment.
Yeah, you're a box on a list.
Yeah, right. You're a box on a Jira list. Great. Yeah. And so what does UX need to do to no longer be, quote, dependent on engineering, but work in parallel with them? Mm-hmm. What sort of engineering resources do we need to adopt? What sort of tools do we need to create that allow us to push to production? Like, why can't I push from Figma to production? Mm-hmm. And have it deploy in a blue-green environment, and I'm testing with users right away. I get my feedback by the end of the day, and I update my design, and then I push it again. And so my time to iterate gets compressed. That's a place I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of work to do to empower designers to get their designs into the hands of end users without being a dependency on engineering.
Right.
And we have CI/CD tooling concepts. We just need to apply them to our discipline. Like, I've researched developers for almost 10 years now. And I sit and I'm like, why don't I have this tool? Yeah. Why is my, qualitative data locked in this repository? Why can't I pipe it to my market research partners, my customer adoption team?
Right.
I have to figure out how to make my qualitative data work with their quant. That's fine. I'll structure my text data into categorical variables, and we can now start to play in that quant world. But why don't we have the technological tooling to connect those dots? And I think that that's a place for UX as a discipline to really innovate, and then even future out, like zooming out from UX to where we're at in the world with all these exciting new tools and toys. I saw a great discussion at South by Southwest on the future billion-dollar teams. And the idea, one of the anecdotes they said is, when is the $1 one-person company going to emerge?
It's a good question.
It's an interesting
it's a great
question.
Thought experiment, yeah.
But a different question is, what's the roadmap for a world without work?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're so professionally identified, right?
Yeah.
Like my job is a part of my esteem.
Yeah.
My craft is a part of my esteem.
Totally.
And so when you start to abstract those pieces, though, well, really, what is a job? A job is just a line item in a corporation's Excel spreadsheet with a dollar amount attached to it and a job code and a career path.
Yeah.
That's not me. That's just how money comes into my account.
Right.
That's all it represents. My craft is mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I have all these different skills that I can plug into all these different line items to create income. But that still doesn't identify who I am, right? And I think we're going to be asked to start to calibrate that relationship to work a little bit more.
Yeah.
We're going to have to decouple the line item that pays us from the craft that we've cultivated in order to make sense of this world, because jobs are going to shift, tasks are going to be automated away, and we're going to have to constantly be morphing so we can fit into those job codes that also are additionally going to evolve and be disrupted as well. It's not static.
Yeah, totally. Especially as transaction costs are changing between employers and employees. I mean, there's so much in the future that's going to, I think, look different. So it's a good point. So I have a big, broad question for you, right? This is podcast is media, right?
Yeah.
Curious to know, when you're consuming media, when you're choiceful about that, what are you turning to for insight, inspiration, or enjoyment? It could be any of those things.
Well, those are 3 different buckets.
Indeed, they are.
For
I think you lost your
I
headphones.
think we just lost, yeah. For inspiration, oh, thank you, Priscilla. For inspiration, I really love food.
Yeah.
And I like to feel calm. So
We have that in common.
Yeah, I watch a lot of Stanley Tucci's like Searching for Italy, like on repeat. Like I'll watch the episodes over and over again.
Yeah.
I'll watch Bourdain over and over again.
Right.
Because it's just like, it's not, it doesn't challenge me as a viewer.
Mm-hmm.
And it focuses on simple anthropological human details.
Right.
And that's very calming. And I'm curious about how people make mortadella. I'm Sicilian, so I love learning where food comes from. For entertainment, I like events. I like live music events. I like actually going to the theater. I just took my dad and a couple of his friends to see Monkey Man, Dev Patel's movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that movie was awesome.
Yeah, cool.
It was nice to have like a South Asian action hero.
I love it.
Like, awesome. No more James Bond. It's Dev.
All right. So, you know what's coming, because this is the Rock and Roll Research Podcast for a reason, right? So I want to know, and we purposely haven't talked music because I love to be surprised by this answer, but I know you're a big music guy. So let's say you're stranded on a desert island. You've got 3 albums of your choosing to keep you company for the rest of your days. What are those albums?
I have a couple questions before I respond.
Every researcher's got to qualify this answer. Yeah.
So how do I get the albums? Is there an album genie, or is this like a genie with like limited capability? Like the only wish they could grant me is 3 albums?
If it were me, I would restrict it to vinyl. But
I'm cool with vinyl. Yeah, I'm not gonna.
But it's up to you, man.
And how did I get to the island? Did it like a crash or like?
You woke up one day, perhaps you were drugged or something, and
I ended
dropped on the island.
But I was conscious enough. I was not drunk enough to bring my favorite album.
Right.
Okay, cool. All right. I'll go with. I'll just say yes and we'll go with it. So I think since my love of music very much stems from Austin's music scene, and it's like I like music, but then like I fell in love with music. Going to school in Austin and just making friends with the members of the music community.
Yeah.
And so one of my favorite bands from Austin, and probably my favorite band, is White Denim.
Oh.
So I would definitely bring Fits. It's their first album. It's like when they were a 3-piece. It's super stripped down, and it just rocks.
Yeah.
Like if you want to move, like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about the first time I saw them play it live at Mohawk. I think my mitochondria are tuned to their like frequencies, because my body will start responding before my mind starts responding whenever I see them. So I love that album. I think the next album, and this might be a cheat. Can I bring a box set?
Yes, you can.
Okay, I'll bring Fela Kuti's vinyl set from the Knitting Factory.
Oh, cool.
And so I don't know how familiar you are with Fela Kuti.
I've just heard them just a little bit. I'm not deep on them at all.
Amazing. So Fela was active in like the late 60s and 70s, and he played with like 20 players on the stage. It's a big show, a lot of instruments. And he was incredibly influential to the American funk scene. A lot of musicians went to Nigeria to collaborate with Fela.
Mhm.
They brought Fela to the EU to play lots of big shows. And his music is just, there's not a lot of lyrics, but if you had to listen to something over and over and over again,
Yeah.
I would listen to Fela Kuti, because I do.
Yeah.
That's an easy one.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, what else we got?
And then the third one, I'm a new parent. I have a little 2-year-old, so
Congrats.
I am exploring music from his point of view as well. And
The Wiggles.
So
You're gonna say the Wiggles?
not the Wiggles.
Okay, thank
No, I'm a little more old school. A good friend at Red Hat, when he came, sent me a record player
Mhm.
and a box of kids records as like a congrats dad gift.
Okay.
And so my
I
son
love
has a record player and a box of kids vinyl, and the one I love is the original Sesame Street vinyl.
Oh,
Like they were
fascinating.
grooving.
Yeah, I love
Like,
it.
They say like sing a song. Like I cry every time I hear that song. It's just so like, the world is really scary right now, and like it's such a simple album.
Yeah.
It just brings so much peace to me.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a little bit last night, where like when I was a kid, it's like I loved complex music. I was listening to Rush and stuff, and all
Rush.
the time signatures and all that. I was all into that. But at some point, it's like I love music that makes me feel good or makes me feel something that I wouldn't otherwise feel if I weren't listening to it. So I love that answer, actually.
It's a jam too. They have like some good players. Like there's
Yeah.
a song like "Has Anybody Seen My Dog?" And like when you play it, like it sounds like it could have been like a song from like Crosby, Stills and Nash. Or like who they put on this album. It's awesome.
I love it. Super cool. I'm so excited that you came for this podcast. I thank you so much. And, I have to say, as everybody knows, it's not rock and roll without merch.
Yes.
So everybody who's on the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, of course, get some merch.
Oh
So,
yeah.
there you go,
Dude.
Nicholas.
Awesome.
A couple of stickers as well.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
And for,
Thank you.
for anybody that's listening, I've got a big stack of stickers. So if you want a laptop sticker or a water bottle sticker, come by and grab one from me. But Nicholas, dude, man, let's stay in touch.
Please.
Talk soon. Let's rock and roll.
Yes. Do you have a metal voice, Matt?
I don't. I'm
Neither-
just a drummer, man.
All right. That's your voice.
Metal. That's what I got.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you.